is seeing historic success in the Everglades.
As Fox 35's Carla Byron explains, it's helping to remove Burmese pythons from the wild in record numbers.
It sounded like a headline from a satirical news site. It sounded reckless, desperate, and to be blunt, downright stupid. When the state of Florida announced a plan to release thousands of predators back into the wild to save the Everglades, the world didn't just raise an eyebrow, they laughed. Social media erupted in memes. Talk show hosts turned it into a punchline. The general sentiment was, Florida being Florida again. If you like these kinds of deep investigations into bizarre real-world events, feel free to subscribe. But behind the mockery, there was a science experiment born out of pure, unadulterated desperation. The Everglades were dying. Not from pollution, not from rising sea levels, but from a silent, slithering apocalypse that had already consumed nearly every small mammal in the southern part of the state. This wasn't a joke. It was the last stand for a $31.5 billion ecosystem. Before we laugh at the gamble, we have to look at the crisis that made more snakes look like a sane solution. Long before the chaos, the Florida Everglades looked like a paradise out of a dream. It was an endless horizon of green sawgrass, broken only by the shimmering river of grass. It was a balanced system where bobcats stalked the brush, raccoons scurried through the marshes, and deer waded through the shallows. That balance didn't end with a bang, it ended with a breeze. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida, flattening communities and, crucially, destroying a reptile breeding facility near Miami. In the chaos, exotic snakes escaped. At the same time, thousands of pet owners, realizing their cute baby Burmese pythons had grown into 5-foot monsters, were releasing them into the swamp to be free. For a decade, nobody noticed. But by the time we started paying attention, it was already too late. The population had exploded. Today, experts estimate that between 100,000 and 300,000 Burmese pythons are slithering through the Florida wetlands. And they are hungry. The numbers are genuinely devastating. Raccoon populations have dropped by 99.3%. Opossums, gone by 98.9%. Bobcats, down by 87.5%. Even the marsh rabbits, once as common as grass, have nearly vanished. In some areas, deer sightings have plummeted by over 90%. The Everglades has fallen silent. The rustling of small paws in the brush has been replaced by the heavy, silent slide of a 200-pound apex predator. At first, Florida fought back the only way humans know how. With brute force and high technology, they opened the gates to bounty hunters. They created the Florida Python Challenge, a 10-day spectacle that draws hundreds of participants from across the globe. In 2024, nearly 900 people showed up, hoping to be the hero who saved the swamp. They caught 195 snakes. While the headlines hailed it as a victory, the scientists were doing the math. We have removed about 23,000 pythons since 2017. That sounds like a massive number until you realize it is estimated to be less than 1% of the total population. For every snake a hunter pulls out of the mud, dozens more are hatching in the deep, unreachable heart of the glades. Then came the high-tech warfare. Engineers built robotic rabbits that mimic the heat and scent of prey to lure pythons into traps. Dog teams were trained to sniff out reptile trails. Drones with thermal imaging hovered over the wetlands. Biologists even turned the pythons against themselves, fitting scout snakes with radio transmitters to lead them to hidden breeding clusters. It was an ecological chess game, and the humans were losing. Each failed attempt deepened the sense of defeat. Scientists began to admit publicly what they had feared privately. Full eradication was impossible. The pythons had claimed the throne, and they weren't giving it back. As if the giant snakes weren't enough, a second invisible invader arrived. Deep inside the pythons was a hitchhiker from Asia, Raeliatella orientalis, better known as the snake lungworm. While the world was focused on 2-0-foot snakes, this parasite was quietly jumping ship. Python droppings carried the eggs into the water. Cockroaches ate the waste. Frogs ate the roaches, and native Florida snakes ate the frogs. For the Burmese python, the lungworm is a minor nuisance, but for Florida's native snakes, it is a death sentence. The parasite tunnels through the stomach and settles in the lungs, literally choking the animal from the inside. Researchers have found native snakes with dozens of worms crawling out of their mouths. The lungworm has now spread to 18 native snake species and is moving as far north as Jacksonville. Even if we killed every python tomorrow, this parasite would remain, potentially wiping out the very species meant to keep the ecosystem in check. Except for one. This was the moment Florida made the announcement that triggered the laughter. They weren't just going to hunt pythons, they were going to release hundreds of eastern indigo snakes back into the wild. The mockery was swift. Fighting snakes with more snakes? Social media jeered. What's next? Releasing lions to catch the house cats? Critics pointed to the infamous mongoose disaster in Hawaii as proof that introducing more predators is always a mistake. But what the public didn't know was that the eastern indigo wasn't an introduction, it was a restoration. The indigo snake is the emperor of the forest. It is a native, non-venomous king that once ruled the entire southeast before habitat loss, and the pet trade pushed it to the brink of extinction. More importantly, the indigo holds a trait that no one could ignore. It is a natural-born snake hunter. To understand why Florida's plan was actually a stroke of genius, you have to meet the eastern indigo. Growing up to 9 feet long, it is the longest snake native to North America. But it's not just the size, it's the attitude. The indigo is often called the emperor because it moves with a calm, fearless confidence that few predators possess. Its scales are a deep, shimmering, iridescent blue-black, often with a splash of coral or red around the throat. But don't let the beauty fool you. The indigo is a relentless, generalist predator. It doesn't constrict its prey like a python, and it doesn't use venom. It simply overpowers its target with sheer jaw strength and swallows it alive. The most important part? The indigo is immune to the venom of North American pit vipers. It eats rattlesnakes, copperheads, and cottonmouths for breakfast. But as the python invasion took hold, scientists noticed something else. The indigo has no fear of other snakes, regardless of their origin. It is a biological heat-seeking missile designed to keep the serpent population in check. By the late 20th century, the emperor had lost 97% of its kingdom. Habitat loss and the gassing of gopher-tortoise burrows, where these snakes live, had reduced them to a few isolated pockets. When Florida decided to release them, they weren't just adding more snakes, they were putting the rightful king back on the throne to clean up the mess humans had made. While the scientists were preparing the indigos for release, something even more shocking happened deep in the wetlands. For 20 years, the Burmese python was the undisputed bully of the swamp. Nothing touched them. But in 2023, the narrative shifted. Researchers were tracking a 1.3-foot, 5'2" male python named Loki. They expected him to lead them to a breeding female. Instead, they found Loki's body sprawled in the grass, his massive head chewed off and hidden under pine needles. The culprit? A bobcat weighing barely 25 pounds. A trail camera later confirmed the impossible. The native cat had ambushed and killed a predator twice its size. It was a first-in-history moment. It signaled that Florida's native wildlife was finally starting to realize that these giant invaders were not invincible, they were meat. Reports began to flood in. Alligators were spotted snatching smaller pythons off the banks. Florida panthers were documented taking on adult snakes. And most importantly, the newly released eastern indigos were seen consuming juvenile Burmese pythons. The home team was finally putting points on the scoreboard. The real stunned silence for the critics came in the autumn of 2023 at the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. Scientists were checking trail cameras and performing routine sweeps when they found something that made the years of mockery vanish in an instant. They discovered 2 wild-born hatchlings of the eastern indigo snake. This was the first time in nearly half a century that the indigo had reproduced in the wild in North Florida. One of the hatchlings was untagged, meaning it was born without any human intervention. This was the smoking gun of conservation. It proved that the indigos weren't just surviving, they were reclaiming the land. They were hunting, breeding, and establishing a new generation of emperors to patrol the longleaf pine forests and the edges of the Everglades. The irony of the story is that the public cheered for the bounty hunters while laughing at the scientists. But the truth is, you can't win a war against an invasive species with bullets alone. Humans are inefficient predators. We miss the hidden nests. We can't see through 5 feet of sawgrass, and we eventually have to go home and sleep. The eastern indigo snake doesn't have a shift. It lives in the swamp 24/7. It goes into the burrows where the pythons hide. It eats the young pythons before they can grow into 2-0-foot monsters. It is a self-replicating, autonomous biocontrol system that costs nothing to maintain once established. As of 2025, the project has expanded. Over 500 indigos have been returned to their native range across Florida and Alabama. The success of the Emperor's Gambit has become a blueprint for restoration projects worldwide. It taught us a profound lesson. Nature isn't something that needs us to fix it with robots and drones. It often just needs us to get out of the way and bring back the pieces we broke. Florida's gamble wasn't a joke. It was a calculated, patient investment in the power of ecological balance. The Everglades is still a battlefield, and the python threat is far from over. But for the first time in decades, the silence of the swamp is being broken by the right kind of sounds. The raccoons are starting to return to certain areas. The marsh rabbits are being spotted again. And deep in the shadows of the sawgrass, the iridescent blue-black scales of the emperor are once again gliding through the undergrowth. The world laughed at Florida for releasing thousands of snakes. But today, the world is watching in awe as the emperor reclaims his throne. To truly understand the success of the indigo, we have to go underground, specifically into the burrows of the gopher tortoise. These aren't just holes in the dirt. They are architectural marvels that can reach 40 feet in length and 15 feet in depth. They are the apartment complexes of the Florida scrub, housing over 350 different species, from owls and frogs to the pythons themselves. Before the indigos were reintroduced, these burrows had become a safe haven for invasive snakes. A python could slide into a burrow, consume the resident tortoise or its eggs, and stay there for weeks, invisible to any human hunter or thermal drone. This was the invisible front of the war. But the eastern indigo is a specialist of these subterranean labyrinths. They have co-evolved with the gopher tortoise for millennia. When an indigo enters a burrow, the dynamic changes instantly. They don't just use these spaces for shelter, they clean them. By reclaiming these burrows, the indigos are restoring the most vital infrastructure of the Southeast. They are effectively evicting the invaders from their bunkers. This underground sweep is something no amount of human funding or technology could ever achieve. One of the most frequent questions from skeptics was, if the indigo is non-venomous, won't it just get killed by Florida's rattlesnakes or the pythons? The answer lies in the indigo's extraordinary biology, a biological armor that is a masterpiece of evolution. The eastern indigo possesses a specialized protein in its blood that neutralizes the hemotoxic and cytotoxic venom of pit vipers. When a diamondback rattlesnake strikes an indigo, it's a lethal blow to almost anything else, but to the indigo, it's a mere scratch. They have been observed taking multiple hits from venomous snakes, only to continue the fight and eventually swallow their attacker whole. Against the Burmese python, the indigo uses a different set of tools: speed and skull density. While the python is a slow-moving constrictor that relies on ambush, the indigo is an active hunter. It has a heavy, reinforced skull that it uses as a blunt force instrument to pin its prey's head to the ground. In the nursery areas of the Everglades, where juvenile pythons are most vulnerable, the indigo is an unstoppable force. It targets the pythons at the most critical stage of their life cycle before they become too large to handle. This is the preventative medicine, the ecosystem so desperately needed. We often talk about conservation in terms of saving the animals, but Florida's gamble was also a cold, hard economic calculation. The Everglades isn't just a swamp, it's the primary water recharge system for all of South Florida. It's the engine of a multi-billion-dollar tourism and fishing industry. When the mammal populations collapsed due to pythons, the entire system began to degrade. Raccoons and opossums are nature's cleanup crew. Without them, certain pest populations exploded, and the health of the vegetation began to decline. The silent swamp wasn't just sad, it was expensive. By investing in eastern indigo, the state is looking for a return on investment that lasts forever. A bounty hunter costs the state hundreds of dollars per snake. A drone costs thousands to maintain. But a wild-born indigo? It works for free. Every indigo that reproduces in the wild is a permanent, unpaid employee in the Department of Ecological Balance. The success of the 2023 wild hatchlings was the moment the Bank of Nature started paying interest. If we can restore the indigo to its full range, we aren't just saving a beautiful snake. We are stabilizing an economy that relies on a functional, wild Florida. If you walk into the restored longleaf pines of North Florida today, you might not see an indigo snake. They are still the ghosts of the forest, moving silently through the shadows. But you will hear the difference. You'll hear the birds that rely on the balance the indigo provides. You'll see the gopher tortoise burrows teeming with life instead of being occupied by a bloated invader. The stunned truth isn't just that a snake can kill a python. The truth is that we, as humans, finally had the humility to admit that we couldn't solve this on our own. We stepped back, we trusted the emperor, and the emperor did not disappoint. The war isn't over, not by a long shot. The pythons are still there, and the lungworm is still spreading. But the battle is no longer one-sided. For the first time in a generation, the Everglades has its king back, and the king is hungry.